Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. My name is Scarlett. I'm 42, a senior analyst at one of the largest technology firms on the West Coast. Or at least, that's what it says on my business card. What it doesn't say is that I'm also the reason our company's valuation soared past $80 billion last year. That behind every so-called revolutionary algorithm lauded in the press releases, awards ceremonies, and TEDx stages is me. But if you ask Benjamin Ross, our VP of Innovation and my direct boss, he'll flash his signature smile and tell you he led the project from the ground up. He'll say it with such unshakable confidence, you might even believe him. Hell, I used to believe him too. Benjamin is the kind of man who was born for press junkets. Tall, silvering at the temples, in a powerfully wise kind of way. Always in designer suits and shoes so polished, they reflect his ego back at him. He has this charming, low-toned voice that makes even nonsense sound profound. At conferences, people line up just to shake his hand and say they were inspired. But what they don't realize is, the man couldn't code a Fibonacci sequence without crashing his laptop. For 12 years, I let him take credit for my work. Why? Because at first, I thought we were a team, that my quiet diligence and his public polish made us stronger. I was wrong. I still remember the first time I let him claim something that wasn't his. It was the prototype for our predictive behavior engine, an algorithm that could forecast user intent 5 moves ahead, like chess. He stood at that product launch, basking in applause, as if he'd birthed the code from his own fingers. I told myself it didn't matter, that the work was what mattered, the impact, the progress. I was such a fool. Every year, I watched him climb another rung, first to director, then senior VP, then head of innovation. Meanwhile, I stayed a senior analyst, a title that sounds respectable until you realize it hasn't changed since 2013. Every raise I got was quietly offset by the bonuses he pocketed. Every award I was too busy to attend, he went in my place. And I let it happen, until last month. It started small, an itch, a hunch, something in my gut telling me the foundation was rotting. Benjamin began mentoring a new hire named Lila. Young, ambitious, straight out of MIT, with a master's in AI ethics and zero clue how corporate politics really worked. I watched him parade her around the office like some shiny trophy, feeding her lines from my roadmap deck as if he'd written them himself. She looked up to him. I couldn't blame her. One Friday afternoon, I overheard them in the break room. Benjamin was telling her that Scarlett's a brilliant technician, but she lacks the vision to scale. I stood there frozen, coffee in hand, heart a drumbeat of rage in my chest. That was the first crack. The second came at the annual tech summit. We'd been working on an adaptive learning algorithm for months. My algorithm. It wasn't perfect yet, but it had the potential to redefine enterprise search. I'd written 90% of the framework myself, including the neural net sequencing that made it efficient in real time. And what did Benjamin do on stage? He pulled up my demo, skipped the technicals, and called it his latest innovation. He even winked. I didn't clap. I didn't even breathe. And then came the email. A forward, accidentally sent to me, from Benjamin to the CTO. Scarlett's becoming too attached to her code. Might be time to sunset her role or move her into a less strategic position. That was the third crack, the one that broke me open. That night, I opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside, it was everything Benjamin didn't know existed. Backup copies of my early models, design diagrams, unregistered prototypes, and one last thing, a little black suitcase with a biometric lock. I'd stored it beneath my desk, marked as an archival hardware enclosure. In it, a physical drive containing my master architecture. Not the sanitized, company-owned version, but my original, clean, unlicensed, and untraceable. I held that suitcase in my lap for a long time. My heart was pounding. Not from fear, but from knowing what I was about to do. That was 2 weeks ago. Now it's Monday. I walked into the office in a tailored navy blazer, handed in my resignation, and turned on my heel without waiting for a reply. Benjamin laughed. "Good luck finding another job at your age," he smirked. I smiled, not kindly. "Thank you for your wishes," I said, and headed for the elevator. As I passed, he noticed the suitcase in my hand. "What's in there?" he asked. I turned, looked him dead in the eye. "The future you thought you owned." His face went white. The moment the elevator doors slid shut, the buzz of the office faded behind me, like the background hum of a life I no longer belonged to. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Not until I saw the look on Benjamin's face shift from smug amusement to something closer to dread. I walked down the corridor slowly, deliberately, carrying the box in my arms like it was fragile, though we both knew it wasn't. It was indestructible. I knocked on the door to his corner office without waiting for a reply and stepped inside. He looked up from his laptop, clearly surprised to see me again. "Scarlett," he said, dragging out the syllables like he was testing their weight. "What is this? Your farewell tour?" I placed the box gently on his pristine glass desk and sat down across from him. My hands rested neatly in my lap. I didn't speak, not yet. I wanted him to fill the silence first. He leaned back in his chair, that same slick grin he wore at every press conference creeping across his face. "Let me guess. Old files? Maybe a goodbye gift? I didn't think you were sentimental." Still, I said nothing. His eyes flicked to the box, then back to me. "You know," he continued, "I'll give you this. You were loyal. Too loyal. But let's be honest. At 42, you don't stand a chance in this industry anymore." He laughed lightly, as if that was some casual truth rather than a blade. "You think anyone's going to hire you after this? A mid-level analyst with no patents, no public work, no visibility? Your name isn't even in the footnotes, Scarlett. It's like you never existed." I tilted my head slightly and finally spoke. My voice was calm, steady, and cool enough to make him pause. "That's what you're betting on, isn't it?" He blinked. "That I'll walk away quietly. That the last 12 years of my work will be buried in your shadow, with no trace I was ever here." Benjamin opened his mouth, but I raised one hand and set a slim silver drive on top of the box. "This," I said evenly, "is a full archive of every project I've worked on. Version histories, annotated commits, development logs with timestamps, private documentation, metadata, even internal emails, everything, from concept to deployment, including the files you presented as your own." He sat up straighter now, eyes narrowing just slightly. The grin didn't vanish, but it cracked at the edges. "I always kept a clean trail," I said, "because I've known for a long time that the day would come when you'd try to erase me. I didn't expect it to take 12 years. But here we are." He scoffed, trying to recover his balance. "You think having a few files is going to change anything?" "No," I said simply. "I think having all of them already has." His fingers drummed once on the desk, nervous. "You signed an IP contract when you joined. Standard terms. The company owns everything." I nodded. "Everything developed through company resources, yes. But not the frameworks I built at home on my own equipment before they were ever proposed. Not the algorithms that predate their internal counterparts. Not the early iterations I documented under provisional ownership, and certainly not the integrated diagnostic system you rebranded as BenVision. That was never even submitted through the formal repository. You presented it straight from a USB stick." His face paled slightly. "I kept the original files," I added softly. "I have comparison logs, data trails, audit timestamps, and more importantly, Benjamin, I have nothing to lose anymore." He opened his mouth, but this time nothing came out. Just air. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "You don't understand the position you're in right now. You think I'm walking out defeated, but what's actually happening here is a transfer of power. You don't own the narrative anymore. I do. His jaw tightened. You wouldn't. I haven't said what I'll do, I interrupted gently. Not yet. But I want you to sit with this feeling for a bit. The weight of realizing you're not in control anymore. That the person you underestimated, the one you ignored and dismissed for over a decade, holds the very threads of the empire you've built your name on. Silence. I stood up, lifted the box again, and turned toward the door. Before I walked out, I paused. One more thing, I said, glancing back. You should check the backup logs on the company server. I left a little note in the metadata. Nothing malicious, just a reminder. What kind of reminder? He asked, voice low. That the architecture remembers who wrote it. Then I left. His face haunted me all the way to the elevator. Not because I felt guilt, but because, for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. And I realized he knew exactly what I was capable of. I was almost at the door when I heard it. Benjamin's voice, sharper now, trying to recover the ground he could feel slipping away beneath him. You're bluffing, he said. You know what the company's IP policy says. Everything made during employment belongs to us. End of story. I turned back, slow and deliberate, like a woman with all the time in the world. That's true, I said, setting the box back down on the edge of a nearby chair. Except you're forgetting one small thing. He folded his arms. Defensive now. You wrote that policy, I reminded him. Well, you signed it anyway, back in 2015, the year after we almost lost that patent lawsuit from Apex. I took a folder from the box and pulled out a printed copy, thick, highlighted, and annotated in my own hand. Do you remember what we changed in the revisions? He didn't answer. His eyes dropped to the pages. I flipped to the tabbed section. Section 12, paragraph 3, subsection B. I'll read it for you. Employees retain rights to intellectual property originated and developed outside company time or premises, provided such work does not incorporate proprietary internal resources or confidential client data. I placed the document gently on his desk. You signed off on this, I said softly, almost kindly. In fact, you insisted on the clause. You said it would encourage creativity and help recruit top engineers. Your exact words, if I remember correctly. Benjamin stared at the paper like it was written in another language. And here's the kicker, I continued, pulling out a second sheet. This one, a copy of the time logs I'd exported from our internal network, marked and cross-referenced with project timestamps. These modules? All developed before I submitted them. All done on my home machine, during personal hours. Every update documented. Every file hash matched. I looked at him then. Really looked. He wasn't smiling anymore. That means the original logic trees, the diagnostic skeleton, the predictive pathway design, they're mine. Legally, creatively, fully mine. He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. And if you're wondering why that matters, I said, lowering my voice just enough to cut through the space between us, it's because everything you've built your public image on traces back to one of those designs. I could see it, the moment it hit him. That slow, sinking realization. It spread across his face like spilled ink. His charm cracked, his posture shifted. The gleam in his eyes dulled as the enormity of what I'd said unfurled in his mind. You didn't just borrow my work, I said. You built your entire career on it. The keynote speeches, the interviews, the awards, all of it. And now I can prove, definitively, that none of it was yours. He stood suddenly, knocking his chair back slightly, but he didn't approach me. He just stood there, hands gripping the edge of his desk, eyes darting from the documents to the drive, then back to me. You wouldn't go public, he said, but his voice betrayed him. It wavered, just a little. You don't want a lawsuit. You don't want the drama. You're right, I said. I don't. His shoulders eased, just a hair. But I will if I have to. And there it was. The panic. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a quiet, visible collapse of certainty in a man who had never once in his life expected to be cornered. Because for the first time, Benjamin wasn't standing in front of someone desperate to keep a job. He was standing in front of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. "I'm not here to threaten you," I said finally, picking the drive back up and slipping it into my coat pocket. "I just wanted you to know the truth, and to feel what it's like when the narrative slips out of your hands." I turned to leave again. My hand was on the doorknob when he spoke, voice hoarse. "What do you want, Scarlett?" I paused. I didn't turn around. "I want you to remember this feeling," I said, "because from this point on, it's mine." And then I left. I should have just walked out. Left him there in the silence of his office, with the weight of his own lies echoing off the glass. But something stopped me just as I reached the door. One last page that hadn't been turned. One final chapter I didn't want him to pretend he didn't read. So I turned around. Benjamin's eyes widened slightly, just for a moment. He tried to disguise it with a lazy lean back into his chair, arms crossed in that classic CEO-light posture. Confident, dismissive, untouchable. But the cracks were forming. I saw them. I forgot something," I said quietly, stepping back inside and picking up a thin envelope from the bottom of the box. "Or rather, I wanted to give you one last chance to see what you really missed." I placed the envelope in front of him like a sealed confession. "What is it?" he asked, though his voice had lost its earlier bravado. It was thin now, paper dry. "A ledger," I said. 18 months in the making." He raised an eyebrow, trying to play indifferent. "A ledger?" I nodded slowly. "A record of everything you ever stole from me." He opened his mouth, probably to deflect, to spin, to mock, but I didn't give him the chance. "I saved the emails," I said. "The ones where I outlined the foundational logic behind the hybrid predictive engine. The ones where I walked you through the machine learning loop we used to cut decision latency by 60%. The ones you printed out, word for word, and then read aloud at the shareholders' dinner, like they were your own." His face stiffened, but I kept going. I recorded the conversations, the Zoom calls, the late nights when you'd ask me to explain it again but slower, because you were too proud to admit you didn't understand the very algorithm that got us a 7-figure extension from Telos Corp. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't, because he knew I was telling the truth. And worse, I had receipts. "I even kept the transcripts," I said softly, "from the internal Q&A session last year. You remember, the one where you spontaneously described our upcoming adaptive logic module using the exact phrasing I just said to you in the elevator 15 minutes before." Benjamin's mouth parted slightly, but no sound came. I stepped closer, not threatening, not aggressive. Just steady, calm, lethal in its precision. "You always thought I was naive, didn't you?" I asked. "Thought I didn't see what you were doing. Thought I was just grateful to be here." He didn't answer. "I was grateful, for a while, until I realized I was the scaffolding you stood on while you built your cardboard castle." His hands clenched slightly on the arms of his chair. "I started collecting proof when you deleted that first offer from Ellison Dynamics," I said, voice low now. "You remember that, don't you? The one you told me never came? Except the HR assistant had already mentioned it at the offsite." They reached out again a few months later, and again, nothing in my inbox. That's when I knew. I pulled out a tablet from my bag, unlocked it, and tapped to the screen. I placed it in front of him. There it was. The contract. Signed. Countersigned. Dated. With my name and Ellison's crest stamped in digital ink. "I signed with them 2 weeks ago," I said. "Full recognition, public authorship, my name on the patents, on the rollout, on the launch. They know I built it, and this time I'll finally get the credit." Benjamin stared at the screen, and in that moment, the silence in the room changed. It wasn't corporate anymore. It was personal, existential. The kind of silence a man hears when the walls of his identity begin to collapse around him. His voice came out in a rasp. You? You're going to Ellison? They made me an offer I couldn't refuse, I said, tone even, because you refused to even forward it. He stopped himself, because there was nothing to say. You kept me boxed in here, I continued, kept my name off the decks, off the press releases. You thought if I stayed invisible, you'd shine brighter. But you forgot something important. His eyes met mine, pleading now, quietly desperate. You forgot that shadows only exist when there's light behind them. And I've been the light this whole time. He slumped slightly. Just slightly. But I saw it. The first crack in his carefully curated image. Benjamin Ross, man of the future, the visionary, the thought leader, was unraveling under the one thing he never anticipated. The truth. You'll ruin your career, he said finally, weakly. Going against me. I smiled, not unkindly. No, Benjamin, I'll finally start mine. And I turned to leave, again. Only this time, I didn't look back. Because I knew the moment I walked out that door, the initiative, the narrative, the future, had finally passed to me. I was halfway down the hall when I heard it, his voice low and strained. Scarlett, wait. I stopped, not because I had to, but because I wanted him to hear the rest, to feel it. I turned slowly, and for the first time in a very long while, Benjamin Ross didn't look like a man in control. He looked like a man beginning to understand how much of his kingdom had been held together by a single invisible thread, and that thread had just snapped. I walked back into his office one final time. He was standing now, behind the desk, like it might protect him. He tried to square his shoulders, but they didn't settle right. I don't think you understand what this means, he said, voice hoarse. You can't just walk out, not now. I tilted my head. Oh, Benjamin, I said gently. I'm not walking out. I'm stepping away before it all comes down around you. He frowned, that desperate confusion flickering behind his eyes. What are you talking about? I stepped closer. Not with malice, just with truth. The system, I said. The one you present in meetings like it's magic. The one that's been praised by analysts and investors and boards. I paused. It doesn't run on magic. It runs on my logic, my architecture, my patches, my predictive loops. You stood in front of people and promised stability, scale, and speed, but you never even understood the backbone. His lips parted slightly. It's stable. For now, I said, because I've been maintaining it. Quietly, nightly, while you polished your sound bites. But now, I let the silence press in. Now the latency issues will start. First a few milliseconds, then more. Minor data misroutes in the network mesh, irregular forecast mapping, anomalies in user clustering. The system won't fail overnight, Benjamin, but it will begin to rot. He blinked. And you won't know where to begin, I added, because you never even opened the blueprint. He started to say something, probably a weak denial, but I held up a hand. Oh, and your keynote next quarter? I said, arching a brow. Good luck with that. I won't be ghostwriting it this time, or prepping your insightful Q&A answers. He paled. I've read your early drafts, I continued, full of buzzwords and empty promises. You'll stand on that stage, babbling about neural acceleration and cohesive vertical scaling, and someone in the audience, some intern probably, will ask a single targeted technical question. I leaned in slightly. And you'll blank. His mouth opened, then closed. I saw the flicker of panic behind his eyes. But don't worry, I said. The world won't laugh for long. He looked up at me, eyes pleading now. Why are you doing this? Because, I said calmly, you built your name on my silence, and I'm done being quiet. I turned and walked to the window, gazing out at the skyline, our building's reflection gleaming against the glass of another. And one more thing, I said without turning around. The new algorithms I've been developing in my spare time, they're real, and they're better. I heard his breath hitch. They're leaner, smarter, self-correcting, and in 6 months, Once we finish integration at Ellison, they'll make your entire infrastructure obsolete. I turned back to face him, slowly, letting each word land. You won't just lose your edge, Benjamin. You'll lose your foundation. Because the future's already being built, and this time, you're not invited. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The truth had weight, and it was settling on him like a mountain. There was nothing he could do, because for all his titles, Benjamin Ross never understood the thing he'd claimed to lead. And now that the person who did was gone, really, finally gone, he was left standing in the ruins of a brilliance he never possessed. And I was already building the next world. I was gone. Officially, unmistakably gone. No internal announcement, of course. No farewell email. No company-wide send-off. Benjamin made sure of that. But inside the walls of that glittering tech empire, something started to shift. And outside, in the places where it really mattered, on the stages, in the interviews, under the spotlight, the unraveling had already begun. At first, it was subtle. His next LinkedIn post landed with a dull thud, a jargon-filled caption attached to a photo of him standing in front of a server rack he didn't know how to read. Innovation isn't a product, it's a mindset, he wrote. Only 5 likes. Interns reposted it with cautious enthusiasm, the way you do when you're still too new to see the difference between a leader and a man in a tailored suit holding someone else's work. Then came the quarterly press brief. He stood behind the familiar podium, same gelled hair, same designer suit, but something about the way he held his hands gave it away. He didn't know what to do with them. No note cards this time, no whispered suggestions in his earpiece, no scarlet in the wings. He spoke in glittering generalities. Our AI division continues to break new ground in scalable intent prediction across multi-platform touchpoints. A tech reporter from The Verge raised her hand. Can you speak to the underlying improvements in your intent mapping? What changed in the data architecture since Q3? Benjamin blinked. He smiled tightly and said, Well, the real innovation lies in the synergy of layered integration. There was a pause. An audible pause. And then the typing began. Reporters, analysts, experts. They knew that kind of answer. It was the kind people gave when they didn't have one. 3 days later, a short piece appeared in Wired Tech Brief. Sources close to the firm suggest a recent leadership shift may have left the innovation wing rudderless. While VP Benjamin Ross remains the public face of development, some are starting to question whether the ideas he champions are actually his. Another week. Another red flag. The annual Pacifica Tech Summit, normally Benjamin's playground. He took the stage in his usual confident swagger, microphone pinned to his lapel, grin plastered on his face like armor. Today, he said, we're entering a new phase of cognition-driven infrastructure. In the front row, a panel of researchers exchanged looks. The keynote rolled on. Flashy phrases, big visions, vague promises. But when the Q&A opened, the tide turned fast. Can you walk us through the model hierarchy of your dynamic learning engine? A professor from MIT asked. He coughed. It's, a recursive multinode. He looked around, eyes darting like he was searching for a cue card. Paradigm. The professor frowned. Could you be more specific? I'm not here to give a lecture, Benjamin said with a forced chuckle. We focus on outcomes, not just blueprints. But the murmurs had already started. By the end of the summit, the buzz in the lobby wasn't about what he'd unveiled. It was about what he couldn't explain. On Twitter, a thread went viral. Watched Benjamin Ross dodge 3 basic architecture questions at Pacifica Summit. Either he's hiding a breakthrough, or he's bluffing hard. Spoiler, it's not the first one. I sat in my new office at Ellison Dynamics, the thread glowing on my screen, a warm cup of tea in my hands, and the sunset bleeding across the city skyline. No anger, no gloating, just quiet satisfaction. Because the cracks had begun, not in his reputation, but in the illusion he'd spent over a decade curating. Without my voice behind his words, his empire was just an echo chamber, loud but empty. And the world was starting to notice. It was late, just past 11. I was home, sitting barefoot on the floor of my apartment, going over the final drafts for Ellison's product reveal, my product, my code, my name on the header. The soft hum of the city floated through the window, and for once, I felt calm, and then my phone rang. I stared at the screen for a moment, stunned. I hadn't seen that name in weeks. Benjamin Ross, the man who used to text me at all hours with last-minute polish requests, who once forwarded me a full slide deck at 2 a.m. with the note, "Make this sound like I know what I'm saying." I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered. "Scarlett," he said, his voice dry and tight. "I know it's late." I didn't respond. He cleared his throat, then tried to speak with his usual clipped assurance, but it fractured. "The conference is tomorrow." "I know," I said simply. I need your help." There it was. No pretense, no manipulation, just raw panic wrapped in desperation. "I need the slides," he rushed on. "The framework diagrams, the pitch angles, even just bullet points. I've rewritten the deck 3 times and nothing makes sense. It's just—" He cut himself off with a frustrated exhale. I waited. Let the silence do its work. Then, barely above a whisper, he said it. "I don't know what I'm doing." I froze. He continued, voice rough now. "I never did. Not really. I said what you wrote, memorized what you explained. I never understood the architecture. I barely grasped the logic. I was afraid to ask questions because it would make me look small. You—" He stopped again. And when he spoke next, the words came slower. "You made me look brilliant, Scarlett. For 12 years, I stood in rooms and smiled while they clapped. But the truth is, I was terrified someone would ask me something real. And now they are." I felt something tighten in my chest. But it wasn't pity. It was the ache of 12 years of being invisible, of shrinking myself so he could be seen. He swallowed hard. "I'm begging you, just walk me through it. One last time." I closed my eyes. I remembered the time he told me, laughing, that my technical tangents made people glaze over in meetings. I remembered when he introduced me as his right hand, instead of the mind behind it all. I remembered the awards where he didn't mention me. The applause that should have been mine. "No," I said, softly but clearly. He didn't respond. "I'm not coming back," I said. "I'm not cleaning up your mess. I did that for 12 years. Still silence. "And tomorrow, when they ask questions, you'll answer them yourself. Or you won't. But it won't be my job to rescue you anymore." He let out a broken breath, almost like a laugh, but it wasn't one. "Please," he whispered. "You don't understand what it feels like." I finally looked out the window, at the skyline, at the building where I once spent every waking moment proving my worth. "I do," I said. "I lived it, and now it's your turn." Then I hung up, and for the first time since I left, I felt the door finally close behind me. The conference was held in the Aurora Grand Hall. Glass walls, polished floors, 3,000 specialists packed into tiered seats under glowing rings of LED lights. The kind of space designed for spectacle, for revelation, for kings of tech to hold court. Benjamin Ross was slated as the closing keynote speaker. The future of learning systems toward sentient algorithms. His name flashed on the massive digital screen above the stage in bold, sterile type. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. But I watched. A live stream, muted at first, just to see how far he'd fall. He stepped on stage with the same tailored confidence, navy suit crisp, hair perfectly styled. But there was something off, a lag in his movements, a hesitation in his smile. His eyes darted, not like a leader scanning his crowd, but like a man searching for a lifeline. Behind him, the slides began. Stock imagery, vague titles. Dynamic synthesis. Beyond the horizon. Cognitive resonance. Empty phrases. Nothing of substance. Nothing resembling the architecture we had built. And then he began. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're building is not just artificial intelligence, it's adaptive intelligence. The next evolution in algorithmic intention. It went downhill from there. The audience listened, quiet at first. Polite, but that kind of politeness that tightens the longer it stretches, until it snaps. 15 minutes in, a hand went up. Dr. Elsa Mendez, AI researcher at MIT. Mr. Ross, she said into the mic, could you elaborate on the neural token condensation you mentioned? How exactly are you implementing it at runtime? Benjamin froze. He blinked twice, stammered, then replied, it's a fluid system. Runtime is handled dynamically, depending on, signal strength. There was a beat of silence. Then another hand, Dr. Lin Cao from Berkeley. You referenced lateral recursion in relation to your training modules, but the lateral loops aren't present in any of your published schema. Can you clarify? More blinking. This time, a twitch at the corner of his mouth. Well, it's proprietary architecture, still in early stages. Murmurs spread through the crowd. And then, another voice. Calm, clear, resounding. Or maybe, the voice said, rising from the fifth row, you're simply not the one who wrote any of this. Heads turned. Dr. Natalia Vasquez, a veteran in the field, former chair of the International Algorithmic Ethics Council. She stood slowly, microphone in hand, eyes steady. I've reviewed your outputs, she said to Benjamin. I've cross-referenced the patents you attached your name to. And what's clear, painfully clear, is that someone else has been doing the work behind the scenes. Someone with an actual understanding of the frameworks. Benjamin went pale. Dr. Vasquez turned slightly, addressing the room now. I've spoken to people who used to work under him. I've seen the internal code structures. This man did not design the systems he claims to lead. A murmur rippled through the audience, sharper now, less confused, more angry. She looked back at the stage. Tell us, Mr. Ross, where is Scarlett Ward? Dead silence. He opened his mouth, but no words came. And there it was. The unraveling. The moment the Emperor stood before the crowd, not only without clothes, but without a script, without knowledge, without the woman who built his kingdom. The cameras stayed fixed. The lights didn't dim. He just stood there, exposed. I watched from my apartment. No smile, no gloating. Just the quiet, solid feeling of truth rising to the surface. Because when you spend a lifetime building something real, eventually the world sees it, even if it has to break the illusion first. When Dr. Vasquez said my name, clear, calm, and deliberate, there was a moment of pure stillness in the room. No one clapped, no one gasped. It was as if the entire auditorium inhaled and forgot how to exhale. And then the murmur started. People turned their heads, whispered to each other. I saw fingers flying across screens, Googling me, no doubt, searching for someone they'd never seen on stage, never quoted in press, never profiled in a glossy feature. The name that had lived in the footnotes, buried under someone else's spotlight. Scarlett Ward. I wasn't on the program, but I was ready. Ellison's team, ever strategic, had given me a speaker's badge in case I wanted to meet some potential collaborators quietly. I hadn't worn it. I hadn't even planned to stay past the second panel. But now, something in me stirred. Not vengeance, not even pride, just clarity. I stood up from my seat, smoothed the front of my black jacket, and started walking down the aisle. No music, no lights. Just the soft, slow sound of my heels on the carpeted stairs. Benjamin stepped back from the center of the stage, like the floor was shifting beneath him. For a moment, he looked at me, not with anger, but with the hollow eyes of a man watching his reflection disappear. He didn't stop me. He didn't even speak. I reached the podium. My hand rested on the edge for a breath. The mic adjusted with a soft click. My name, I said, is Scarlett Ward. 3,000 faces stared back at me. For the last 12 years, I was the architect behind the behavioral logic models that power the intent prediction systems you've heard about today. No one moved. I designed the adaptive feedback loops, the decision-weighting architecture, and the language processors that made the interface not just faster, but intuitive. The screen behind me flickered. Not a corporate deck, not branded noise. My code, my diagrams, my original framework. Today, I said, for the first time, I'd like to show you what I actually built. And I began. No theatrics, no slogans, just real language. I showed them the lattice structure that made behavioral deviation analysis possible, how we trained the system not just on what users clicked, but on what they hovered over, what they almost selected, what they stopped themselves from doing. Prediction, I said, is not about knowing the future. It's about recognizing patterns people don't realize they're creating. The slide advanced. This is our cultural filter mesh, I continued. It isolates ambient context from cultural bias using what I call semantic echoes, tiny linguistic choices that change meaning across regions. We don't just localize content, we localize intention. More heads nodded now. Phones dropped. People were listening. Then came the questions. Rapid fire. How did you handle entropy in the recursive model? We seeded it, I replied, without pause. Every 60 hours, the model self-tests and removes 3% of its core assumptions unless revalidated by real-time data. That keeps it from hard-coding historical bias. How do you account for adversarial training risks? Distributed sandboxing across 3 isolated layers with an automatic lockout on suspected recursive loops. I built the flags myself. And then, a sound. Applause. Slow at first, from one corner of the room, then another. Then it surged, wave after wave, until the room filled with something I had never felt before. Not just respect, recognition. Not for who I supported, not for who I worked under, but for who I was. The woman who built the system they couldn't stop talking about. The woman whose name had never been on the banner. Until now. I stepped back slightly and glanced toward the wings. There stood Benjamin, alone, hands clasped uselessly in front of him, his face pale and unreadable. He hadn't left, but no one was looking at him. He wasn't the story anymore. I was. A moderator stepped forward, stunned but smiling. Ms. Ward, would you be open to presenting your full model breakdown at our closed technical summit next month? I nodded. I've already uploaded the documentation, I said. Another ripple of quiet laughter, the good kind. I took one last look at the audience, their eager eyes, their questions, their curiosity, and something inside me clicked into place. This was my room now, my stage, my voice, and for the first time in my life, I spoke. Not behind someone, not through someone, but as myself. Scarlett Ward, lead architect, and the world was finally listening. After the conference, Benjamin Ross vanished. No farewell post, no follow-up interviews, not even a vague, stepping away for personal reasons statement. He simply stopped showing up. The company tried to contain the fallout. Their PR team scrambled, issued one vague press release, tried to spin the summit as a shared innovation moment, but no one bought it. You can't package silence, and you definitely can't unsee someone unraveling on stage in front of 3,000 experts while pretending to understand a system they never built. The headlines came fast. The mind behind the machine wasn't Ross, it was Ward. VP of Innovation exposed as figurehead in live tech collapse. Intent AI's real architect steps forward. The shareholders didn't wait for explanations. Within days, stocks began to slide. Within weeks, they plummeted. Investors withdrew. Partnerships dissolved. Analysts downgraded forecasts. And when the audit was completed, verifying my authorship, my logs, my time-stamped builds, the patents were reissued under my name. I didn't even have to fight for them. They were mine from the beginning. Ellison Dynamics integrated my new architecture into their next-gen platform, And the beta program hit a 96% satisfaction rating on day 3. Industry forums lit up. I started getting invitations from every corner of the tech world. Keynotes, research collaborations, advisory boards. And this time, they asked for me by name. Scarlett Ward. The quiet one. The ghost in the system. Not anymore. One afternoon, maybe 3 weeks after the summit, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text. A real envelope, addressed in handwriting I recognized instantly. Benjamin. I stood in my office, looking at it for a long time before I opened it. It was brief, less than a page. A few sharp lines written in black ink on thick, expensive paper. Scarlett, I owe you more than I can ever apologize for. But here it is anyway. I lied. I stole. I let my fear and my ego turn me into someone who couldn't say the truth out loud. I watched you build brilliance, and instead of honoring it, I tried to bury it. Because I knew I couldn't match it. I was never what they thought I was. I think you knew that deep down. And still, you gave me 12 years. 12 years of light I didn't deserve. I see it now. I really do. And I'm sorry. B. I read it twice. Then, I folded it neatly and set it in the bottom drawer of my desk, beneath a stack of early notes from the models I was now preparing to publish. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't need his apology. And I certainly didn't need his guilt. Because the truth is, it no longer mattered. What mattered was this. I had become who I was from the very beginning. Only now, the whole world could see it. And I was just getting started.